So I'll say a very good evening to everyone. You're joining us from different parts of the connection. And I'm Jean Delaney, and I'm pleased to welcome everyone on behalf of the Yorkshire West District MWIB Committee. Welcome to everyone. We're delighted to have Rachel Lampard as our guest speaker. And I'm sure we're going to learn a great deal about her role as the Director of Social Justice for the Methodist Church, and importantly, how we can support Rachel's work. We were chatting before you arrived, or at least were allowed into the meeting, about an event at Swanwick. Rachel thinks it was in 2018, and she challenged us through a very novel activity where we had to embroider a message that really addressed some of the needs of the community we lived in, or the world that we live in, and take it to our MP. I remember embroidering a serviette, and with another of the participants, we met with our local MP and told him all about it and asked him to express concerns in Parliament. And Rachel's used that technique in many different ways. Now, another person making an important contribution this evening to the smooth running of the evening is Matt Collins. I don't know whether you can see him on your screen. Now, Matt's our technology expert for the evening. And really, luckily, Rachel and Matt have worked together on previous occasions. And that's been very, very helpful as we've prepared for this event. Matt wants me to inform you that he will be recording this meeting. The intention is to put it on the Yorkshire West District's YouTube channel so that it can be accessed by people who weren't able to join us this evening. Only those who speak will be on the recording, and of course you always have the option, if you don't want to be seen online, of turning off your camera. So, before we hand over to Rachel, let's ask for God's blessing on our time together. And I'm going to share two opening prayers taken from the Methodist website. The first one is a prayer that God may broaden our horizons, and it's written by Helen Kirk. She's the district chair for Chester and Stoke-on-Trent district, and it seemed very appropriate. So join me in this prayer and the second one that I'll read for you. God of infinite wonder, whose love has no horizon and whose grace has no border, we open ourselves to your presence this evening. God of the minutiae, in whose company the word insignificant has no meaning, we receive your blessings this day. Raise our eyes from only that which is in front of us. Lift our heads that our vision may be broader and longer. Sow seeds of passion in our hearts and lay embers of hope in our lives, that we may never accept the concept of inevitable, but instead cultivate communities of peace that live a language of possibility. And another short prayer written by Gwyn Bamford, with the supernumerary deacon in Bromsgrove and Redditch circuit. It's a prayer that we see the world through God's eyes. If we see the world through your eyes, Lord, then we see a vision of our world as your love would have it. A world where all who are weak are protected and none go hungry. A world where your riches of creation are shared for everyone to enjoy them. A world where mutual respect is expressed between different races and cultures, and harmony descends. A world where peace is built with justice, and justice is guided by love. Give us the inspiration and courage to build it how you see it, Lord, that all may praise together, and the only power exerted is the power of your love. Amen. So over to Rachel, who will lead us through the evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. It's lovely to be with you this evening. My name's Rachel Lampard. I'm joining you from East London this evening, but it's particularly lovely to be invited by the Yorkshire West Methodist Women in Britain. Being born in Leeds many years ago, it feels a little bit like coming home, but it's great to be joined by other people from across the connection. So thank you very much for the invitation to join you this evening. It's lovely seeing people kind of arriving on screen as we join together in Zoom, seeing old friends and new gathering across the screen, seeing a few faces that I saw at the Wholehearted gathering this last weekend, and seeing some people I've not seen for many years, and some new people. We'll get to know each other this evening, so it's great to be with you this evening. My role working for the Methodist Church, as it says on the screen, as Director of Social Justice and Social Action, which is a slightly wordy title, but put very briefly, it's to try and help Methodists, Methodist churches, and broadly the Methodist connection to really wrestle with, to understand what it means for us to be called to be justice seekers, to be called to follow a God who is just, and to work that out in our discipleship every day. Now it's a very broad description, isn't it? And it has all sorts of different ways of working itself out. And I'm not going to take you through the minutiae of my job. What I really like to do today is to tell you some stories and to listen to some of your stories, because I want to learn from you, and perhaps to share some ideas and inspiration with you today. The title that Jean suggested, How Shall We Do Justice, is one of those big questions, those big challenges. What does justice mean to us? How do we live in ways that are just and fair in a profoundly unfair world? Listening to the news just today is hugely challenging, isn't it? And it's only those big stories of injustice that take up that airtime. We are aware of so many parts of the world where massive experiences of injustice are happening every day in people's lives that don't even make the radio, don't even make the television. And in situations like this, where do we find hope? Where do we find hope when things get tough in the world? Where do we find hope when things get tough in our own lives, when we're experiencing injustice in our own lives? And what does it mean for us to try to do this as Christians? I'm not going to be able to suggest that we're going to be able to answer all of these questions this evening, but perhaps we're going to be able to start just lifting the lid and exploring some of those, and perhaps give you some ways of following down some of these questions after this evening. One of the things that I hope we're going to be able to do is have conversations together. Now, if we were gathered around a table together, perhaps having eaten some pancakes, we'd be able to break into conversations. The beauty of doing this in Zoom is that we will try and do this in a very efficient way. And one of the beauties of working with Matt is that he helps us to do these things. So over the course of this evening, we're going to go into breakout rooms, and Matt will help us to do this. Most of you, I'm sure all of you, will have been on Zoom before, so you'll know how this works. But if you have any problems, just sit tight and Matt will help you work it out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have what's called a rounds, and we're going to go into pairs and just introduce yourself to one other person. And I'm going to give you a question to talk to each other about. I'd like you, and Matt's very helpfully put it in the chat there, if you can see it, I'd like you to introduce yourself to the other person and just talk about your local area. What do you love about your local area where you live? What do you love? And what would you like to be different? Now, just to warn you, you've only got 3 minutes for this, so you've got a minute and a half each. So to introduce yourself, to say what you love about your local area, and to say what you would like to be different. So Matt's going to press the magic button and you will go into your pairs, hopefully somebody you may not know, and to do those 3 things. Welcome back, everybody. It is so much easier, isn't it, getting everybody back from a Zoom breakout than it is trying to get quiet in a room after everybody's been talking to each other. But hopefully you just had a few moments there to say hello to somebody else in the room, perhaps somebody you knew, perhaps somebody you hadn't come across before. So why did we start with that if we're talking today about justice? One of the reasons is that justice does not happen in the abstract. Justice begins where we are. It begins often with things that we know about, things that we care about. Begins with people that we know about, things that we care about, places that we know deeply or want to know more about, where we hope to see that change happening. Change happens through relationship. Very rarely do we manage to bring about change, bring about challenge to injustice on our own. Very few of us have that kind of power. We have to bring about change together, bring it about in conversation by discovering those shared passions. I wonder whether some of you, when you talked about things that you loved about where you live, found those moments of connection, those shared passions, things that you thought, oh yes, no, I love that about where I live, or that's something that is really on my heart that I want to see changing about where I live as well. Perhaps you began to uncover things that were already happening in your community, things where you are already active, where you're already seeking justice in your community, either as individuals or working together as communities or as part of your church to make things better. This isn't something new. This is something that is already going on. And perhaps that's something that you talked about in your group. That's something that's also really important to hear and share together. If I'd been in a group, I would have talked about the way that I love my community in Walthamstow, either from the way that it came together around the time of the riots in the summer to stand together, or the way that my local street can pick up all the weeds so that the council doesn't spray them with weed killer and we get to be a bee friendly street. But I would also have talked about the fact that young people don't necessarily have that sense of being part of community, can't participate in that sense of community. Perhaps that's something that resonates with how you described where you lived, but perhaps it's something very different. But one of the things I really want to emphasize this evening is that justice is something that we are, by and large, already active. We are already doing through our churches, in our communities, by ourselves. It is not something that we are having to start over to begin to do something new. And by talking about the things that we care about, the things that we're passionate about, the things that we are longing for, we can begin to recognise where we are already finding those connections, we are already active in our communities. You can tell that I'm using a very broad, expansive word for justice here. This may not be a word, the associations of justice that are ones that sprung up in your mind when you saw the title of this evening advertised. The kind of justice that I'm describing is about more than right and wrong. It's about more than making the punishment fit the crime. It's about things being more than just fair, even. It's about a kind of justice that brings life in all its fullness. It's about justice that is about the flourishing of all creation. It's about restitution. It's about reconciliation. It's about a kind of justice that is on the side of those who are most experiencing injustice. It's a kind of justice which isn't the job of just politicians or just activists or people who get paid to do this kind of thing. It's a lifelong vocation for all of us who are called by the God of justice, who calls us to act justly and to love kindness and to walk humbly with God. This is the kind of justice that we're seeking after in our lives, in our church, and in our world. So tonight, I just want to share some of the stories about how I've seen and experienced justice, both through my work for the Methodist Church, but also more broadly through my own personal engagement with justice. And I'd like to invite you to share some stories and conversations, and then perhaps we'll end up with some practical suggestions together. I've got 4 stories I'd like to share. It's not very Methodist, is it? I usually do things in threes. And then I've got a little picture to help it stick in your mind. The first picture I want to share with you, I don't know whether anybody else will recognise this. I think if we're in a room, I'd do a guess. This is a particular spice called sumac. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly. We would call it sumac, and it's made from berries, kind of spicy berries. It's used largely in kind of Persian cooking, in Asian cooking, in Iranian cooking, I mean to say. And I want to talk about this because for me, justice is about flourishing. Last year, I visited a church. Just round the corner from this church, there was a hotel that had been taken over, adopted by a local authority. And a lot of people from Iran who were seeking asylum had been placed into this hotel. Now, it was quite grim. It was not a good place to stay. And these poor young men, they were all men, single men, were really having a rough time. They had had all the experience of escaping Iran, traveling, being trafficked, all that experience, getting into this country, seeking asylum, and they had ended up lonely in this bad accommodation, and they were being fed the most dreadful food. It wasn't really hot food. It wasn't food that they was culturally appropriate. They weren't getting enough to eat. There was nowhere in the hotel that they could gather together, and it was very, very bad for their mental health. Luckily, the church realised this and opened the door and put the kettle on and invited people in. First of all, they just made people cups of tea and gave people somewhere to sit, and it was very basic. They soon realised that the place of connection was even more important for people than that kind of basic help. There was nowhere to gather, but they could gather together at the church. They could talk together. They could begin to connect and talk in their own languages. And then some of the men came to the people in the church and asked whether they could cook their own food. They could cook for themselves. Now, you know how precious church kitchens are, don't you? So this was quite a big ask. And luckily, the church just said, yes, please do, be our guest, get on with it. And the most wonderful smells started floating through the church as these young men began to cook their home cooking again. And they obviously cooked for the congregation. They wanted to be hospitable and they cooked the most wonderful food. There was something really important for these young men about being able to offer hospitality back. Seeking asylum, going through that process, removes people's dignity. It removes any agency and choice and ability to make decisions for yourself. The ability to cook in your own, the language of your own stomach, as it were, was something completely different. To be able to offer food to people who had offered you a welcome, enabled them to give something back. It enabled these young men to be who they wanted to be. So the spice is a representation that justice is about enabling people to flourish, not just providing them somewhere to sit and a cup of tea, or even offering them enough calories for them to be able to eat. But it was about more than just surviving. It was about thriving and flourishing. And as relationships grew, the church was able to accompany people through that process of seeking asylum. And some of them started to come to church. And there was that other kind of flourishing that happened. So for me, that spice, that sumac, is a reminder that God's justice is expansive. It's not limited to what's right and wrong. It's not limited to survival. These might be steps along the journey. But justice is a recognition that humanity is made in the image of God. It's about our inherent dignity because we are made in the image of God. We are all made in the image of God. And so it's about finding ways of expressing justice seeking in which people can flourish in all their beauty and difference. So the first story is that justice is about flourishing. The second picture that I want to show you is a bit of Christmas wrapping paper. For me, this is a reminder that justice has to be about being with people and not doing justice to people or on behalf of people. I had a friend who started as a minister at a new church, and the church did a lovely, generous thing for its local community. Every Christmas, it collected together Christmas gifts for local children whose parents didn't have enough money to buy presents for them. And the usual traditional thing happened. They put on a party for the children, and there were two piles of presents, very gendered, but one for the girls and one for the boys. And the children came forward and picked a present and opened it up. And the parents stood at the back and they saw the child opening the present that they couldn't afford to buy for their child. And the minister said, after Christmas had happened, that he wondered whether it might be possible to do things just a little bit differently next year. So next year, the parents were invited in for a coffee and a mince pie when the children weren't around, when they were at school. And the parents were invited to look through an Argos catalogue, other catalogues are available, and to choose something that their child would like. And the church then ordered it, and then it arrived, and the parents were invited back, and there was loads of wrapping paper, and the parents wrapped it up and took it home. And they gave it to their child on Christmas Day, just like every other parent wants to be able to do for their child. The church enabled this and then got out of the way. They didn't need to be involved in that loop. They didn't need to do justice for the parent or meet the needs of the family. They just enabled the parent to do what parents want to do. They got out of the way. The following year, the minister had by then got to know the community a bit more and had found out that the community had sorts of skills and gifts and desires, and the church just provided a bit of a bit of a funding pot, and the hall and the parents organised their own Christmas party for the children as well. There is a challenge, isn't there, about the language that we often use in our justice seeking. We talk about meeting the needs of our communities, the role of churches in speaking up for the voiceless. Nobody doesn't have a voice. It's just that people aren't heard. We are not there to meet the needs of our community. Our communities can do things for themselves. It's just there are lots of barriers getting in the way. Perhaps it's our role to listen to what our communities want and join in and put our resources, our energy, the gifts that we've been given in the pot with our communities and do it together. More than that, we actually have to admit that communities have so many talents, so many gifts, so much potential that are squashed and prevented from being used that actually we're looking at a bit of a criminal waste of talent, aren't we? So how can we be with people? How can we make this one of the centres of our justice seeking? We have to remember right the way through the Bible, we see God showing a bias, and that's a really strong word, but a bias to people who are in poverty, people who are marginalised. God is already on the margins. God is already with. God isn't being for or to, but God is with. And that's the challenge to us. Remember that with the wrapping paper. The third picture is the one that Jean perhaps hinted at a bit at the beginning. This is a heart that I sewed when I led a different craftivist session with a group of probationers last year, and encouraging them all to make a gift for their MP to think about the Let's End Poverty movement. The little pink forward sign is a symbol of the Let's End Poverty movement. I'd already made a gift for my MP at the previous session I'd led the previous week, so I decided to hold on to that one, and I've got that one stuck up on my wall as a reminder to me. But for me, this is a message that justice is about transformation. It's not just about sticking plasters, and it's about us joining in with God's transformation. Lots of churches are involved in providing food for their local communities. It's much harder, isn't it, to remember to ask the question, why are people hungry? Why are people experiencing poverty in our country? In our country, 1 in 5 adults meet the definition of poverty. 3 in 10 children, a third of children nearly, meet the definition of being poor. Worse than that, the number of people who are destitute in this country, who can't afford to meet their most basic physical needs to stay warm and dry and clean and fed, nearly 4 million people last year experienced destitution, 1 million of whom are children. And these figures have nearly doubled since 2017. Sticking plasters are really important. They stop the bleeding, don't they? But if you leave a sticking plaster on a wound for too long, the wound gets infected. You've got to sort out the problem. Desmond Tutu used that famous line, didn't he, about the role of the church sometimes being not just pulling people out of the stream, but going upstream to find out why they're falling in the first place. The Let's End Poverty movement for the Methodist Church was the key instigator behind make this moral case. Let's end poverty. Absolutely. Let's be alongside people experiencing poverty. Try to make sure that poverty doesn't harm children, doesn't make children go to school hungry. But let's end poverty. We are a nation where people do not have to be poor, and we know the ways in which we can end poverty. We have a moral case for ending poverty. Now, this may sometimes involve campaigning for fairer social security. It may be about providing affordable housing. It might be about enabling people to become debt-free or begin their own social enterprises. But fundamentally, poverty is a moral disgrace, and we have to join in ending it. It's a reminder, isn't it, that with God we are joining in the business of transformation. Hearts, minds, souls, circumstances, and God's transforming power reaches everywhere. And that's what we should pray for and work for and seek to be part of. We have to ask the why questions when we're thinking about transformation, don't we? Why are people hungry? Why are refugees becoming homeless after they've been given the right to remain in the country? Why are people in temporary accommodation for years on end? Why are energy companies reversing their renewable commitments? Because it's only by asking these kinds of why questions that we move towards the underlying reasons for justice, prompting us to move from just the sticking plasters to the kinds of actions, local and national, that help us join in a movement for transformation, because justice has to be about transformation. My final picture is of a postcard, and this is a very special postcard. You'll see that it is a postcard from Colombia, the South American country of Colombia. And this for me is a reminder that justice is about God's good time. A reminder that our understanding of justice is only ever partial and provisional. It is about God's justice. We're not always going to agree about justice. Our disagreements about justice form the basis of our disagreements about politics. But this doesn't mean that this is a reason to opt out. I said at the beginning, I described our calling to justice as a vocation that we all have to justice, a continuing calling to wrestle with what that looks like. The story behind this postcard is one that goes back over 40 years. You'll see that it's addressed to the Reverend John Lampard, who lived in Worthing at the time. That's my dad, not surprisingly. He was a member of Amnesty International, and he wrote a letter to a prisoner of conscience in Colombia, one of many letters that I'm sure many of you have written. This is the only reply he ever received. And it was a postcard from a prisoner of conscience, written from a prison cell in Colombia. And Dad held on to this this postcard, and it stayed one of our kind of family stories. I only saw it for the first time a couple of years ago when I started doing this particular piece of work, and Dad shared it with me. So I read it for the first time, and the man who wrote it said he received the letter and wanted to thank my dad on behalf of the card for him and the people of the church for the interest he's shown in his situation. The constant communication of the friends in the UK lift my spirit and give me hope so that someday I'll have fair justice. There's what he says. My dad gave me this postcard, and with the wonders of the internet, I looked up the name of the man that it was from, and I found the Amnesty International report into his case from the 1980s. And I found out that his detention took place because he was the leader of the National Teachers Union in Colombia at the time. He was kidnapped, he was disappeared, he was held, and he was tortured. And that was the final thing I saw about him from Amnesty International. I looked a bit more, and I found out that he was a law lecturer in Colombia now. So he survived and was a law lecturer. I managed to track him down and found him on social media, found him on Facebook. I made contact with him and said that we had a copy of this postcard from him, and heard back from him and had a message saying that when he had been released from prison, He was then elected as what was called a constituente, a representative to the Colombian body that drew up the democratic constitution of Colombia. What an amazing story. Somebody had gone from being a political prisoner, held in a prison cell and tortured, and he had gone to be a drafter, a writer of the constitution of his country. And he wrote back and said, "Thank you, and please give my thanks to your father." Isn't that wonderful? So rarely do we see the outcomes of those small acts of justice that we take. 40 plus years later, that was one occasion when I saw the other side of a bit of tapestry. We see the knots and the bits of the other side, the underside of the tapestry, don't we? And on this occasion, I was fortunate enough to see the beautiful side that had emerged. Martin Luther King said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It might not feel like that sometimes, and it might feel particularly hard at the moment. But as Christians, we believe that we do know the end of the story, don't we? We may ourselves just walk a bit of the way. We may not get there in the end, but we remember that justice happens in God's time and in God's way. One of my colleagues, Martin Johnson, who works for the Church of Scotland, reflects on what feels sometimes to us as failure when we are wrestling for justice. He says, every failure is not a sign that we will always fail. The road to justice is a long one, but it's one we walk alongside others who walked it for centuries before us. For we believe the kingdom will come on earth as it is already come in heaven. So for me, that postcard is a reminder that it's ultimately about God's justice and God's journey. So those for me are just 4 of the stories that I wanted to share with you that pick out 4 of the elements of justice that have inspired me and shaped my understanding of justice seeking. Justice is about more than surviving, it's about flourishing. Justice isn't about doing things to people or for people, it's got to be about being with people. Justice isn't about sticking plasters, it's about transformation. And justice is ultimately about God's time and God's way. None of these is about a list of things that I'm asking you to go away and do. I'm not asking you to go away and campaign or set up a project or do a new thing or feel guilty because you're not doing something. I honestly believe that everybody is called to be a justice seeker, and we all have a role to play. We're probably doing something already, but one of the crucial things is that we all have roles to play together. There's a story that's told in the Justice Seeking Church report that went to the Methodist conference this year about the Chelmsford Quakers. I have a lot of admiration for the Quakers. I think we learn a lot from their witness, what they can teach us. In Chelmsford, they were over the road from the Magistrates' Court, and you may remember that there was a group of people who were arrested for protesting against people who were going to be deported. They tried to stop the deportations, and they got arrested, and they were being tried at the Magistrates' Court. So the Quakers in Chelmsford decided that it was their calling to support the people who were being tried. They did all sorts of things. Some of them stood on the steps and did a very Quakerly silent witnessing. Some of them stood alongside the defendants and looked after them directly. Some of them offered accommodation to their families who were nearby. Some of them held the contact with the media. And 2 of the people from the Quaker Meeting House just made soup for everybody. All of these people were involved in the Quaker witness against deportation. The different ways that they responded, standing in solidarity or praying or making food, reflected their own personal gifts or preferences, but they were upheld by their cohesion as a worshipping community together. As Quakers, each person's contribution became an act of activism because of the collective witness of the meeting. Probably the things that I've talked about this evening, one of them will echo with something that you are doing or you know about or you've seen or resonates for you at the moment. What is it that you're doing, and how does that fit within our collective witness as Methodists and as a Methodist movement? I'd like to pause for a moment and just ask you to stop. If you've got a pencil and paper, you might like to just grab that. Otherwise, just sit and think for a moment and just call to mind any words or phrases that have come to your mind while I've been talking. Any images or words or phrases, or perhaps stories that have come for you. Just sit in silence for just a minute or two, and then we're going to go into groups, but I'll give you instructions in a minute. So just one moment of quiet. Matt's going to put you into groups now. These are going to be groups of 4, and you're going to have just under 10 minutes with each other. I'm going to ask you to share what words came to mind when you think deeply about justice, and then whether you have a story to share. So you'll have about 8 or 9 minutes, and then we'll come back. If you have the ability, then when you come back, I'll invite you to pop those into the chat. If you don't have the ability to do that, don't worry about it. And then we'll go back into the next part. But Matt, hopefully, will put those questions into the chat. What words come to mind when you think deeply about justice? And do you have a story to share? Welcome back, everybody. As you start coming back in, if you have the desire and wherewithal, if you want to start putting into the chat any of the words or the phrases or the ideas that came out of that conversation, share them with everybody else. You can see the kinds of things that started emerging. That might be, for the people sitting in Christchurch, that might be a bit harder to sum up lots of people's thinking together. Give people choice to uphold their dignity. Thank you for that, Caroline and Rachel. Stick your neck out, try and right some wrongs, being bold and acting. It's from Delphine. Thank you. Working alongside other people. Responsible and overwhelmed. Leslie, do you want to say something about that? If you want to just unmute and just say something about that.
Yeah. Well, the first word that came into my head was overwhelmed. Just because there is so much that I want that you want to change or want to help make better. But then it's our responsibility, because because of where we live, we have freedom of speech. We have the ability to make a change. So even though it's overwhelming, and in our group we didn't talk a lot, but there are things happening, like you said already, Rachel, and maybe overwhelmed, I can knock on the head really and just get on and do it, which is what somebody else has just said. We just need to get on and do it, and do what we think is right, but not just to sit and think I can't do anything, but just to give it a go.
Give it a go, do something. Does anybody else have any thoughts about how we deal with this danger or this feeling of being overwhelmed? How do other people cope with that? If you just want to stick your hand up or wave your arms at me, if you want to contribute. How do we not feel paralyzed and overwhelmed by the injustices that we face? Is that Joy waving her arms at me? Do you want to unmute, Joy, and speak?
Speak. Hi, can you hear?
Yeah,
we can. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We had a little group.
Oh, I think that might be.
Yeah, that's okay. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, is that Christchurch? Hello, Christchurch.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we had a little group, but we had a lot of little groups. But our little group said some words: inequality, racism, prejudice. Against racism, prejudice, fairness, sharing, equal distribution is sharing. Following on from your excellent example of the asylum seekers coming to church and making food, that was fantastic. Empowering others to do things for themselves. And we got to get political.
Yep. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. I think Joy Coates had a hand up. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'd put communication. The fact that, I mean, we live in an area where there are quite a lot of Muslims, and when you go out to the shops and things, we came across someone that we'd not seen for a good many years, that we were at college with, that we trained to be teachers with, who asked us, do you speak to them? She suddenly realised where we lived. Well, do you speak to them? Never said the word. And my response was, well, when your doctor, your pharmacist, your dentist and your optician is one of them, yes, of course we do. They're just ordinary people like everybody else. But it shocked us really to the core to think of professional people that we had trained with had that attitude.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, it is, isn't it? Yeah. And how we challenge, how we how we engage with that kind of position. Yeah. Oh, you've gone silent, Joy.
We were guests in their home, and so felt that we couldn't say too much, in a sense. That was being we probably should have said more, but we just thought, well, I thought, because it was me that responded, if we leave them with that thought, I mean, this lady described how she'd gone to visit her husband in hospital and a car had drawn up by the side of her, and four of those people got out, and she'd run to the hospital ward because she was frightened. Now, this is somebody who trained to be a teacher 50 years ago and has had a career in teaching in the Liverpool area. I can't believe that she's not come across people of other races and what have you. And we were just shocked, you know. And these are professional people. So
Thank you. Thank you.
And our experience, actually, when we first came to Murfield and went to the optician, Patty, who is a Muslim, spent 15 minutes just chatting with us, getting to know us, building up a relationship before he started to examine our eyes. And that's why we put communication. It's so important that the conversation backwards and forwards.
Yeah, that communication both ways. That's really helpful. Yes, thank you. Just some of the other comments in case people can't see them. Gwyneth and Lionel say allowing people to flourish and not just to survive. Matt says justice doesn't always mean doing what I want. That's interesting. Christchurch mentions sharing and equality. Lots of other really big and challenging themes coming through there as well. Not got my glasses on. I'm sorry. You can tell I'm peering at you. Pam, they're giving people hope and being open and able to listen. Caroline also commenting on the overwhelm. Delphine saying just doing what you can, and Leslie saying prayer, listen, and discuss. The question of overwhelm and prayer is a really important one, isn't it? Because we often think about overwhelm in terms of what we can do, and that's really important because we can't do everything. We can do something, we can't do everything, and that's one important thing. But if we are doing this as Christians, we are following a God of justice, then I always say churches aren't just charities with a pointy roof. We're doing this as churches, so we are rooting all that we do in God and in prayer. So praying for situations, but also praying for discernment for ourselves is also a really important part of this as well. Do you find it easy to pray for justice? If those of you who are leaders of worship, those of you who are preachers and leaders of worship, it can be quite hard, can't it, sometimes, praying for justice. People think you're praying for politics sometimes. Did anybody share any stories that they wanted to talk about that for them illustrated what justice meant? Doreen, do you want to unmute?
I have carers come in to look after me, and they are all Black Nigerians. Lovely ladies. I do have problems deciphering what they're saying at times, and I have to explain some of the Yorkshire things that I like, going to spend a penny, what do you mean? So I'm having to explain things. One of the things that concerns me is when I still think back to the slave days, and that it does concern me that in the slavery, that's how they used to have to work for their slave masters, and I'm not a slave master, but I do feel that sometimes, that's my feeling. I don't know whether they feel the same, but they're nice ladies.
Mm. Mm. Thank you. It's interesting, isn't it, how much more aware those of us who are of white heritage are now of how those relationships of power and lack of power must feel to people. And I certainly am much more aware of things that, you know, I was perhaps completely unaware of before. And I think that because we're talking much more about an awareness of slavery and of colonial times, perhaps it's sensitizing us to kind of power relationships and how we think about things and talk about things, you know, in an important way. So yeah, thank you for raising that, Doreen. It's really helpful. We live with a massive heritage still, don't we? Yeah. Thank you. Caroline and Rachel, I think you've got your hands up.
We have indeed. I was just going to tell a story about a food bank near here. It's not so long ago where food banks gave out standard parcels, but this particular food bank has all the things on display on the shelves, and people can come in and select what they want to take away with them. So they're not being given things they don't want, and they have the freedom to choose what they want, and it gives them that bit of dignity.
That's really helpful. I was just looking in the comments. Somebody, oh, it was you who was saying about
It was
choice,
me,
wasn't
yes.
it? Yes,
Yeah.
Giving people choice to uphold their dignity.
Yeah.
And that's been really interesting with the growth of the pantry movement, which is much more along those lines. So instead of food parcels, people pay a small amount to join, and then can go and at a very much reduced rate, you go and buy a certain number of things. But between you, it's like a co-op essentially. You're kind of buying into a cooperative movement. And you co-own it, and churches that have hosted or offered their premises up to pantry movements have reported finding the people who previously would come along as kind of recipients, people who come along feel that it's their pantry and they volunteer. Or, you know, there's much more a sense of that kind of, you know, dignity and participation, because poverty just strips that away, doesn't it? So that choice, that agency is so important. I think that's alongside the flourishing. Thank you. That's really helpful. That might be a helpful one, just to move on to the final question that I wanted to ask. And I want you to have in the image in your head of the central heating dial, or a dial on the cooker. Imagine just moving the dial just slightly. So I'm not asking you to go and start doing a completely different thing, but what I'd like you to just wonder in your minds is whether there's something that you've heard this evening in conversation, or something that's occurred to you, where you could see there's an opportunity for just moving that dial. It might be something that you are committed to in your own life or work or activity. It might be something that your church is doing, or your community is doing. Is there something where you could just begin to move that dial? It might be moving it more towards participation and flourishing and choice for people experiencing injustice. It might be moving that dial a little bit more towards your church being more with people rather than doing justice for people, or to people, or speaking up for people. And if so, what might that being with look like? Might it be moving the dial more towards the big questions of the why, of the transformation, and not only the sticking plaster? And if so, what that might look like? what might just that click of the dial look like? You can always do another click next year or next month, but what might that first click look like of moving the dial in terms of our deep thinking about justice? I don't think we've got time to go into breakout rooms unless we could perhaps just do you think we could do 5-minute breakout rooms, Matt? Would that be all right?
Yeah, that's
Because
absolutely fine.
I think it might be good if people could perhaps just share an idea, just perhaps come up with one idea with people, and then come back. What might one click of the dial towards deeper flourishing or transformation or more being with, or another idea that you've had this evening, one click of the dial that you might be able to think of? So perhaps you'd like to just indicate if there is something that you would like to share. Is there something that you identified that you might like to try? So one click of the dial, how you might move the dial, and if there's anything that might help you to do that. Just put your hand up. We've only got a few minutes left, so just a few sentences, suggestions. Christchurch. Hello, Christchurch.
Are you speaking?
Please do, yes.
Hello.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, hello, we can hear you.
Hello.
Oh, no, you're muted again. I'm sorry. Christchurch, I'm sorry, you're muted again. There you go. That's it. That's good.
I have to hold it, do I? Okay. Thank you. Our circuit is having a year of every week saying a prayer in the morning service for young people's mental health. And I looked at what we've got on our notice board and trying to think of it from a position of, we have a cafe, so we get lots of people through the foyer. And they would look at that and say, oh, they're praying for young people's mental health. And we know how powerful prayer can be. But to people outside, that means, oh, we're praying. Oh, yeah, that's nice. But there's nothing practical about it. So I would like to try and turn the notch where we do something practical as well as the praying. So we have prayer with action. I'm quite willing to try and persuade it to happen here in Christchurch, which is a Methodist and URC LEP. So we're not all Methodists.
Please tell us where you are.
Oh, we're in Ilkley.
Thank you very much. That's helpful.
Brilliant.
You know the
Thank you.
song, I expect, but I promise not to sing it.
No, I've been to your church. I can picture where you are now. Thank you.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, I can too. Thank you.
So I would like the circuit to also look at doing something practical as well as praying.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for that. And the next notch might also be then to see whether there are young people who you engage with or engage with the community, and how they might want to be involved, how they might want to be prayed for, what action they might want as well. That's brilliant. Fabulous. Thank you for that. Keith, did you have your hand up?
I did. I was going to make a similar point about, because it's the same circuit.
Is it? Okay. Fantastic. Well, that sounds like it might happen then in that case. I love that. There's a couple of comments here. So Leslie's talking about introducing craftivism to the existing community craft group, which is wonderful. And Matt's pointing out there is a brilliant craftivism group in Leeds, which is part of the Leeds Sanctuary, who do wonderful stuff as part of the community there. So that would be amazing if you were weaving in the craftivism there. Where is your craft group, Leslie? Looking for you on the screen.
Oh. Sorry, it's at Clifton Methodist Church, which is just outside Brighouse. So it's
Oh,
not
yes.
a rural church as such, but there's nothing there really other than ourselves and a couple of pubs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's brilliant. Thank you. And Suzanne's talking about what's going on at Huddersfield as well. And you're working on a Let's End Poverty banner. That's amazing.
Yeah, hi Rachel. Sort
Lovely
of
to see you.
inspired. I've been along to the Let's End Poverty stuff, and we've just got a very small group of us at the minute. And we started off inviting each of our churches to. We've got about 22 churches in the circuit. Could they all create a banner? Sorry, they were all given a panel, say 25 by 30 centimeters, and think about what does cut poverty mean or look like in the local community, and what would they like to see done about it. And then the idea is we're at the point now where we've collected as many in as possible, and now we're going to put them all together, and we're looking to create a Let's End Poverty event, working in partnership. You'll know my husband Paul down at Huddersfield Mission. So we're looking to do something down there and try and engage local MPs as well as community and people that use the mission and the churches.
Fantastic.
So it's kind of an ongoing thing at the minute.
Amazing. Oh, fantastic. That's brilliant to hear. Thank you. Anyone else want to name something that they have come up with, an idea for moving the dial, or something that would help them to move the dial for justice? Just wave your arms or put your hand up. Caroline.
Rachel wants to say something.
Hello, Rachel.
Hiya. We have a coffee morning on a Wednesday, and at 11 o'clock we have a silence. We have a prayer, and then we say, like, we have a prayer, and then
Time for people to say names.
yeah, time for people to say names who they want to pray for, and we have so many names that come out of that prayer. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And this is probably people that wouldn't think of themselves as a praying people. People from the community. So it's giving them the space and the ability to be able to pray.
It is, isn't it? It is. Yeah. Thank you for that. Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you. Well, hopefully over the next few days, these little seeds will be in there, and you'll keep just noticing these ways in which you might be able to keep moving the dial. I've got just a few resources to leave with you at the end, which Matt's going to share the slides with me. The first is a book that was produced last year in support of the Justice Seeking Church work, which was edited by Barbara Glasson, called We Have Voices, and this is aimed for public worship. So not so much private prayer, but for public worship. So praying together for peace, justice and change, and that's available for Methodist publishing. And all good bookshops as well, I'm sure, but Methodist publishing primarily. Staying with the worshipping theme, but also really quite useful for people who want to look at the lectionary at home. Politics in the Pulpit is a resource produced by the Joint Public Issues team, and it's a weekly podcast which comes out nice and early, looking at the weekly lectionary readings through the lens of peace and justice, and has a conversation about the weekly lectionary readings. The next one is called Living Justly, and I was really hoping I would be able to tell you that it was already out, but it's not quite ready yet. It's coming soon. This is a series of resources, a kind of a course that enables you to look at the what are called the principles for justice, the 6 theological principles which the Methodist Conference identified or agreed as underpinning the Justice Seeking Church work, and it's a whole smorgasbord of resources. So whether you're church group meets online or in person, or if it's an intergenerational group or one that likes experimental things or doing straight Bible studies, everything's there for you, and that will be downloadable online. The Joint Public Issues team is looking to set up, or it has started setting up, the Constituency Action Network. They're looking to find at least one church in every single constituency, 600 odd constituencies, a church that will commit to building a relationship with their local MP. You don't think that would be too hard, would you? That'd be a good thing to do. So a church that commits to build a relationship, to pray for the MP, to raise issues with them, and to keep that relationship going. So if that's something that you think your church might commit to, it's got to be more than one person, it's got to be something that the church commits to, then find out more about the Constituency Action Network. And then if you want to find more about the Justice Seeking Church work and the report that underpins it, you can find out more at methodist.org.uk/justice. Lots more information there. And it is 8:30, and that comes to the end of my presentation and my input into this evening. Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you. Please do keep in touch. I should have put my email address on the bottom of there, but it's very easy. It's just lampardr@methodistchurch.uk. If there's anything you want to follow up, any questions you have, or anything that occurs to you after this evening, please do keep in touch. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for all that you've contributed this evening. You've left us with many ideas and thoughts, you know, and I'm glad that it's being recorded, because I think I want to go back to some of the points that you've made. One thing that's stuck in my mind is justice is about flourishing, and I'm very proud that my own church has really reached out to the community. It's called Wednesday Welcome. It's open house, and it attracts quite a range of people from the community. And they come at, well, they can come at 10 and leave at 3. I mean, people come in and out, but there's food, there's a social program, and friendship groups are forming, and it's good to see. Yes. So I'll close with a prayer, if I may. I've got it here, a prayer for our own discipleship as we ponder all the things that we've learnt this evening. And it's a prayer that's written by a minister from overseas who's serving in the UK. Lord, send us out. Send us out from our buildings, though they are full of history and comfort and meaning, and lead us into your world as your disciples, where the story is still being written. Send us out with our hearts full of love and concern and fear and hope, and lead us into your heart for this blessed and beautiful world where the story is still being written. Continue to bless places for lonely people to gather, the soup lunches, the warm spaces, missions and prayer gatherings, and all the ways we seek to move from where we are now to where you want us to be. Lord, send us out and remind me that the story is still being written. Amen.